Welcome to a new week. So we have Unit 8, Assignment 3, Zero Product Property. And so I just want to do a quick lesson on what that is and what that talks about. We'll go ahead and get started with that. So zero product property, what does product mean? Product, you know, is the answer to a multiplication problem or a times problem. So that's what product is, or that's what we're dealing with. Let's quickly talk about multiplication and zero. When you were doing your times tables quick tests and you'd get to one that looked like 1 times 0, we loved that, right? Because it was 0. Or 9 times 0, it was 0. We loved when it would hit something times 0 because it was a quick 0 and easy to go on. Anything times 0 gives us an answer of 0. That includes x. Now that we're in algebra, x times 0 is going to equal 0. So anything times 0 gives us a 0. Well, we also know that if I've got x times y, and that equals 0, if x times y equals 0, then I know either x has to be 0 or y has to be 0. So I know x or y must be 0. Okay? Or actually, you could have both x and y equal 0. Could be either or. This has to be 0 or that has to be 0, because when I'm multiplying them together, my answer is 0. So I know that one of these, or it could be both, have to equal 0. So we're going to do some algebra problems where I know, using that property of when I know I multiply two things together, if I get to 0, that I know one of them has to be 0. So let's go ahead. And instead of making up some problems, I'm just going to use problems off your worksheet if that's okay. So we're doing some problems for you. Problem 1 says x minus 5 times x plus 3 equals 0. So I've got this group times this group equals 0. This binomial times this binomial equals 0. So I know either this binomial has to be 0 or this one has to equal 0. Just like when I'm multiplying two things together, they get 0. That means one of these has to be 0. I'm multiplying this times this and I'm getting a 0. So I know either this has to be 0 or that has to be 0. So we just go ahead and set that up algebraically. So I go x minus 5 could equal 0 or x plus 3 could equal 0. And yes, it could be both. So you're just going to solve these equations, simple little one-step equations, solve them to find out what x is when we get to 0. So this says x minus 5. I want to do the inverse of that. So I'm going to add 5 to both sides. So I get x equals a 5. Here I've got a plus 3, so I need to subtract 3 from both sides. So I'm getting x equals negative 3. So I know that x has got to be 5 or x has got to be negative 3 to give us a 0 when we multiply these two terms together. Sometimes you'll write it like that. Sometimes you'll put it in set notation. Okay, either of those are great. Let's go on to another problem. I'm going to go down to problem 6. Let me look at that. So I've got the quantity 8z minus 6 times times the quantity 12z plus 14 equals 0. So when I multiply this group times this group, I'm getting a 0. This binomial times that binomial gives me 0. So I want to know either this group has to be 0 or that group has to be 0. So I just set them equal. 8z minus 6 equals 0, or 12z plus 14 equals 0. And then you've got some algebra equations to solve. Let's see, add 6 to both sides first on this one. So I've got 8z equals 6. This means 8 times z. I need to do the inverse of that. So I divide by 8, and I get z equals 6 over 8. We know that fraction can reduce, so we're going to go ahead and simplify that fraction so that we get a 3 over 4. So z could equal 3 over 4 if this binomial equals 0. Let's find out what z could equal if this binomial equals 0. So I'm going to subtract 14. So then I have for this one 12z equals negative 14. 12z equals negative 14. This means 12 times z, so I need to do the inverse. I need to divide both sides by 12, divide by 12. So I get z equals negative 14 over 12. Yep, it's an improper fraction. We're okay with that, but we should simplify it. And that's going to give us a negative 7 over 6. Our answer could be negative 7 over 6 or 3/4. Okay, that's how we do those problems. Let's take a look at another one that's a little different. I'll go for problem 7 on this assignment. And the great thing about being a video is you can stop at any time you want to. So to do the problems in between. So I've got b squared plus 6b equals 0. I think if I were designing problems, I would never put 6 and b in the same problem because then it starts to have issues. My 6's and b's look the same. All right, let me make sure I wrote the problem down right. Okay, this doesn't look like the other problems that we just did, where we had one term times another term equals 0. So if I look at this, I can tell I need to factor out. I need to factor first. Okay. So now we're using some of the things we've been using on the other days. So on 7, 8, and 9, you need to factor first. So let's see, what can I divide both of these terms by? I can factor out or divide them both by b. So that's a b, not a 6. So I've got b plus 6 when I factor that out. Now let's check to make sure I've got it right. B times b is b squared. B times 6 is 6b. Now if it bothers you that this one, you can always draw parentheses around that if you want to, but you wouldn't need to at all. But now I know that this times this equals 0. So I know either this has to equal 0 or this group has to equal 0. So I'll set that one equal to 0. Yay, no work on that one. And when I set this one equal to 0, then we have a little bit of work. We subtract 6 from both sides. And so we get b equals negative 6. So I know b is going to equal 0 or b is going to equal negative 6. Now we can write that in more formal notation. Let's see, I'll go the negative 6 first and then the 0. Okay, you could write it like that also. So that's how we do those problems. For, let's see, 10, it levels up a little bit because as you look down at problems 10, 11, and 12, there's nothing equal to 0. So we need to go ahead and get it so that something equals 0. So we can use our zero product property. So problem 10 is 3k squared equals 6k. All right, so how can I get it so that one side equals 0? Well, if I just subtract 6k from both sides, 3k squared minus 6k equals 0, then we can go ahead and do what we did in problems 7, 8, and 9. We now have it equal to 0, so we're going to factor first. So let's see, what can I divide both terms by? I could divide both of my constants by a 3. And let's see, they both have a k, so I can factor out 3k. And what's left inside would be k minus 2. Let me double check. 3k times k is 3k squared. 3k times negative 2 is negative 6k. So I factor that correctly. So now I know either this term or this binomial needs to equal 0. Either this stuff has to equal 0 or this stuff has to equal 0. So I set them each equal to 0. And then solve for k. Let's see, if I divide both sides by 3, divide by 3, I get k equals 0. Okay, so I set them each equal to 0. Divide this side by 3, so k could equal 0, or I add 2 to both sides, and I get k equals 2. So I could have 0 or 2 are possible answers. Okay, k equals 0, k equals 2. I want to go ahead and do one more problem. I guess I don't need to leave it up there longer. You can always hit pause if you need to. I want to do one more problem for you off of your worksheet. So if we take a look at problem 16 and 17, it looks like it's different just because the wording's different, but it's kind of the same concept. So our directions on 16 and 17 say find the zeros of the function. So I'll go ahead and do problem 16. That's f of x equals x squared minus 15x. Okay, so it says find the zeros. What that means is I'm going to set f of x equal to 0. I'm going to set this whole side equal to 0 to find out what my x would be. when my f of x equals 0. Okay, so all we've done is turn this into a 0 because we want to find out what x is going to be when this side equals 0. And now it looks just like the problems that we had on 7, 8, 9, and 10 through 15, or 10, 11, 12 also. So you're going to go ahead and solve for x. This side equals 0. Now the 0 is on the left, but it'll be okay. So let's see, I can divide both of these by x, or I can factor out an x. I've got x minus 15 inside my parentheses. So I know either this, so I know this times this has to equal 0. So either this has to equal 0 or this has to equal 0, because when you multiply two things together and you get 0, you know one of those had to be 0. So I've got 0 equals x, and I've got 0 equals x minus 15. So that one's done. And if it bugs you, you can always turn and write it like that. Now I'm going to add 15 to both sides, add 15 to both sides. So I have 15 equals x. Okay, so I now know that x could equal 0 or x could equal 15. All right, so that's a quick lesson. And I did some of those problems on the worksheet for you to walk you through that. Again, you can always contact me if you have any questions as we go along. Thank you so much and good luck.